Going live. Okay. Alrighty. We are live. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. We are very excited to host this session. It will be a very timely one. I know everyone's probably running hard towards the end of the year. So, look, I might kick off. I know there's probably a couple people still funneling in, but we might go for the intro straight away. So, welcome everybody to Caring for the Carers, a self-compassion reset for ECE leaders. I'm Hayden. I'm the head of partnerships of Mana, and we've been hosting a few of these webinars over the last couple of weeks to really provide an ongoing effort to uplift our sector. We know it's been a very tough year, and we know the early years are the most important, and we know that a lot of you do so much great work day in, day out that we want to make sure is recognised and appreciated. But you've also got to take care of yourself as a part of that too. And we know a lot of you are focused mostly on taking care of others. So we know, right now there's a lot of challenges when it comes to managing wellbeing. There's a lot of workload pressures when it comes to things like documentation, a lot of parent demands, and also the sector has been under a bit of scrutiny recently, which has been challenging for everyone that's doing really great work across the sector as well. So I guess this is a chance for us to really take the time to reflect and also look out for our own well-being so that we can look out for others in our services and ultimately provide better outcomes for children as well. Now, before we dive into it, I'll do a quick acknowledgement of country. We'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we work and live on, honouring the elders past, present and emerging. We respect the deep connections of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have with country and commit to learning from their wisdom as we build our shared future. So before I go to our guest speaker today, I'll just do a quick overview of us. We are Mana. We're committed to ensuring every child has an extraordinary start to life. We do this through having a purpose-built, child-safe AI coach that supports intentional teaching and halves the time you spend on paperwork to spend more quality time with children. Now, today's focus, though, is on our very special guest, Jo Maloney. And I want to give a big welcome to Jo, who I've met through my studies in Masters of Positive Psychology. Jo is the founder of Conscious Positivity, drawing on 30 years in early childhood and community services, where she saw firsthand how educator wellbeing impacts the quality of care. Jo is driven to create practical, science-based support. She now works as a consultant, speaker, coach, and author, helping individuals and organizations build wellbeing and resilience. Jo's book, Wellbeing Science in Early Childhood Education, blends positive psychology with actionable strategies, and she is equally passionate about supporting educators to respond confidently and compassionately to challenging behaviours through trauma-informed social-emotional approaches. So big welcome, Jo. We're really excited to have you and can't wait for the session today.
Thanks, Hayden. Really excited to be here.
Awesome. So before we kick off, we might just do a quick housekeeping, because this is a bit of a new platform that we're using, hopefully easy enough for people to use. So throughout the webinar, we're really excited to kind of hear your questions. You can use the chat box to ask your questions, and you can also upvote questions to help us prioritize. So we'll keep an eye on those and try and get to those throughout the session. Now, we will also have all the recordings available to watch on demand afterwards. And throughout the session, we'll also be doing a couple of polls just to kind of get a sense of how you guys are feeling throughout the session. And we might actually start with our first poll, which will be the one I'm going to put up here. And let's see if people can see that one, which is, how are you really doing today? So if you could answer this out, we'd love to get a pulse check of the room, how people are feeling. Hopefully you can all see that. Okay, a few people feeling a bit stretched. So I'm hanging in there. It's a busy time of year. Mostly hover surrounding those two. No one thriving. So hopefully after the session we can try and push a few of those up. But that's a good pulse check. Thanks everybody for responding to that. Hopefully, Jo, that gives us both a bit of a sense of the room. I'll pause there. Awesome. So what I might do is I'll take that away. And I might just frame this session, and then before throwing into Jo. So my background, I started my career as a before and after school care educator, and then I spent time working at Deloitte in the strategy team, focused on the education and mental health sector. And I did my master's in positive psychology, which is where I sort of became familiar with Jo's awesome work. And one of the things that Jo and I sort of really learnt throughout our studies in positive psych was around kind of what is the real nature of burnout. There's often a bit of a misconception that people think, burnout is due to one thing and is very unilateral. I work very long hours, therefore I'm burnt out, or I have a really toxic boss, so therefore I'm burnt out. But really, what's really interesting within the research is burnout is best described as more of a balance scale. And there's this model called the job demands resources model, which sort of frames that burnout is when you have too high job demands and not enough resources to meet those demands. So it does mean you can see people, and we do see often examples of this, a lot of early childhood leaders working very long hours, but they're not burnt out because they love what they do. They have great pay or have a great team. So just one factor on hours might not contribute to burnout. And this is why we need to view it as a balance scale. So some examples of those demands are having high workloads. A toxic team culture could be a drainer on your demands, or you could have a physically demanding job as well, as we know most of you do. But on the resources side, you can have job resources, but you can also have personal resources. So job resources are things like recognition or pay, supportive team relationships, or seeing or having career growth opportunities, which allows you to have more kind of resources to work and achieve some of those tasks that you need to do. We also have the personal resources, so things around, what is your passion, what intrinsically motivates you. If you're in a career that is something you're just doing for a wage versus something you're really passionate about, you get different resources that support you through burnout. Personal resilience, so that just might be your personal traits. Or other resources you can tap into. And then also your physical health. So sleep, diet, exercise, those are all really important. So looking at this model holistically is important to think about when you are considering burnout. And today, we're going to talk about a personal resource that is often under tapped into, which is self-compassion, which is sort of fits in that personal resources box. And that's kind of what Jo, we're going to get Jo's expertise on. So we just wanted to kind of frame that, Jo, I'm going to steal your line, but there's no sort of magic wand. And I guess what we can't control for maybe some of the toxic team culture things that are happening, or the workload or documentation pressures that you faced. What we're really going to focus on today is the things that you can control here on this call. So on that note, love to throw to Jo to if you want to add anything on top of that, and then we can get into discussion.
I think what I kind of always, when I use this reference when I'm working with services and leaders, is that because the way our brain is wired, that we have an automatic negative tendencies, is that what we tend to do when we've got our spotlight of, what we're focusing our attention on, what we shine the light on is the demands. Because that's just the way our brain's wired. So, and I talk to services about being conscious of their ants, so their automatic negative thoughts or automatic negative tendencies, so that we can be aware of those to go, where are we shining our light? I've got my torch, where's the spotlight going? Is it going on demands? Or am I becoming more aware and more conscious of the resources that I have available to me? So that I can, even out that balance, that we can do it by just, shifting the light of what we're focusing on can really support us to stop feeling as overwhelmed by our demands, because that's not going to end anytime soon. The expectations in our sector aren't going to go away anytime soon. Yes, there's lots of things we can do to manage those demands and to kind of lighten that load in different ways. But they're not going to go anywhere anytime soon, particularly when it comes to, staffing and, families, high demands of us. All of those things are still going to be there. So we can kind of make some easy shifts, some easy wins of balancing out that scale to start with, by just thinking about where we're putting our focus, which is, and I think too, of looking at those resources, even just shifting out, having a tiny little spotlight today on compassion, whether that's compassion for self or compassion for others or both. When we think about the benefits of some of those, we actually, it's a personal resource and a personal resilience, but also too, it can really help supportive relationships. And the research shows us it actually helps our physical health as well. So some little tweaks can have a really big impact of the way we see that. And the thing is too, when we've got those, when we've got those high demands and we're just focusing on those demands, we know that's what contributes to our stress levels and emotional exhaustion. The longer we spend time in that space, the longer and longer we spend time in that space, the closer we are moving towards burnout. So it's that length of time, because often we use the word burnout to kind of go, oh, I'm just exhausted at the moment. But we use burnout as a whole, term that kind of actually we can be misusing it to go, actually, I'm just exhausted this week because this week has been huge. And whereas if we kind of go, actually, I'm exhausted this week, next week is a new, fresh start. I don't have to see that as use that term as a thing that's kind of all the time, because burnout is a really serious thing. So we need to ensure that we're not overusing that term of burnout, that we're kind of using it in that true context of this is that high levels of stress and demand, that's impacting negatively on us physically and psychologically over a long period of time. Yeah.
That's a really good point, Jo. I think, as even the word well-being, as we've sort of explored, is not really well defined. And I think people often underestimate the importance of vocabulary and language in having just a frame of reference for these things. So I think it's a really good takeaway for teams to start to be careful with the language that you use when you talk about burnout and that spotlight effect, and talking about it as, okay, this balance scale, having more of an open mind around what are the, what's pulling you down, what's pulling you up. And also the time part I really like as well, because ups and downs are a part of life, and I think often this day and age, there's a lot of toxic positivity around everything always having to be perfect, and we get influenced by what we see on Instagram, and we don't see the behind the scenes. And what would life be without highs and lows? That's feeling the full spectrum of the human heart. So, but I think to Jo's point, you want to keep a lens on, okay, when is this down period extending too long and you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that's when really burnout comes into the picture. Because it's a good point, a lot of people do overuse that term for just maybe they had a big day and I'm feeling burnt out, which and I think it's just like understanding how the literature is codifying it, because if you have a good definition, then you can come up with better strategies if we don't know where the goalposts are. So I think that's a great point, Jo. And I think then, to summarize this, what we're really focusing on is, and you don't have to feel burnt out to then start to work on these things. This is what it's all about. So this is always trying to keep all the balls in the air. And I like to use the analogy of, happiness being like a leaky tire that you always need to constantly fill up, or a muscle that you need to constantly keep using. So great point, Jo. And I think it's a great takeaway. And would love to kind of, if that's a good segue, to dive into how do we build the muscle of self-compassion, and why does self-compassion matter? What's the research say around it?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and you're right around that nuanced around language as well, and it really supports us to think about these things on a different level. That that well-being, for example, is so broad. The Wellbeing Science shows us there's so many different components that we can talk about when we talk about well-being, but often, when we talk about well-being, often we're talking about self-care. But I think too, thinking about those different components can be really helpful. So if we think then of self-compassion, the value we get from being more self-compassionate is immense, particularly as leaders, that we're supporting ourselves to have higher levels of well-being. When we're more self-compassionate, we have higher levels of well-being. We have high levels of life and work satisfaction, like you mentioned with the, the demands and our resources. That, if we are, seeing those resources in a better light, and that we there are some people that have the same levels of demands but aren't burnt out or, feeling emotionally exhausted, then, that's, because they've got that contributes to those higher levels of work and life satisfaction. It decreases, when we have more self-compassion, it decreases our levels of stress that we feel. And because it's we have self-compassion is like a buffer. So it buffers us from that stress and from levels of anxiety. But also too, it turns down the dial. I mentioned that our automatic negative thoughts. It turns down our dial for those negative emotions and the impact that those negative emotions have on us. And what we see is that we're better at going, those negative emotions give me information, and I need to use that information to do something. Rather than just going, I'm just consumed by it. I'm going, okay, right, what do I need to do about this? But also too, in shifting that dial, when we're turning the dial down on our negative emotions, it automatically, if it's the dial, this side is negative emotion, this side is positive emotion. And I use those terms very again, it's about that nuanced language. Negative isn't always bad, because it gives us information. Positive isn't always good, because like you mentioned about toxic positivity isn't fabulous either. We need to make sure that we are using those as pieces of information. But when we turn up that positive emotion, what we're doing is increasing our capacity to be able to problem solve, to think creatively, and to see solutions rather than just the problems. So it's really helpful to just think about where's your dial sitting in that, and acknowledging your ants. So for example, there's a couple of services that I have been working with, and they have on their wall, and the poster is just an ant with a big red cross through it that says, be mindful of your automatic negative thoughts. So thinking about, you might create yourself some visuals as well in your, you might stick it in your computer or in your office or somewhere, to be able to remind yourself, where's my dial sitting? Am I tending towards, those negative thoughts? Because we want to have those benefits that we receive, that we get from that level of self-compassion. So the reason our stress levels go down is because we have all these physiological changes when we are more self-compassionate, and when we create environments that are more compassionate, our cortisol levels drop, which is, one of our stress hormones. So that starts turning down. But also too, we have increased levels of serotonin, which is a mood stabilizer. So when we're on this roller coaster of what it can be on a daily basis in early childhood, with, staff calling in sick, and, the cook also called in sick, and we now find ourselves in the office and we're doing these things, and a parent's on the phone and has got an issue about something, that whole roller coaster that we can, undertake in a whole day, that serotonin supports in stabilizing that mood. But also too, with those positive emotions that we can experience more of, it also supports that release of endorphins and hormones like oxytocin, which is a connection hormone. So it supports us and puts us in a space to be able to build connections with other people a whole lot easier. The other thing, which is really relevant in early childhood when it comes to self-compassion, is that it increases our levels of immunity. And we know, children like sharing lots of things, including the latest, gastro bug, or, influenza A, or whatever else is going around at the moment. Children and families like sharing all of those things. So it's really helpful if we can have those supports of increasing our immune function as well, and also too supports in that recovery and healing when we have been unwell. So it's kind of shortens that time frame as well of, that it takes us to get over things, which is really, really helpful. So when you kind of look at some of the science behind it, of those, physiological and psychological benefits, you kind of go, it's a bit of a no-brainer, that this is something that's worth investing some time and effort into. And the thing is too, some of these things don't need a great deal of time. They're things that we can literally just incorporate into our day kind of on the go.
Yeah, that's a great because I think with a lot of these things, we were discussing before the call, people don't necessarily understand the benefits of what looking after your well-being can do for you. And a lot of them aren't something you do one-off. They're a capability, a muscle that you build over time. But yeah, I would love to get less sick for sure. I would love to be less stressed. So I think I think that's the thing. There is a lot of upside that we actually haven't really been able to quantify until recent years, because a lot of this stuff, people, if you said well-being maybe 30 years ago, people would think you're a loony or you're in fairyland. But there is a lot of hard science right now, as Jo's mentioned, why it's important to practice these things and how that can improve your performance and also just general satisfaction with your life. So I think that's really cool. I guess the second question then comes to, well, what does it actually look like? What does self-compassion mean? Because when I think of that term, I kind of know it sounds like a good thing. Like compassion is like a positive word, but I guess where do you find what does that look like in practice, Jo? Like, what is someone that is really self-compassionate and what is someone that's not? And could you paint like a day in the life of like what that difference looks like, and then we can unpack how do you get more to that person? Like what is it?
So if we look to one of the world's leading researchers on self-compassion, Kristen Neff, she's got a mountain of research and information, and she talks about the three main components of self-compassion. So one is mindfulness, so being aware and having a level of acceptance and non-judgment is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about mindfulness. She also talks about self-kindness, so kind acts towards self, and common humanity. So to recognize that we all make mistakes, we're all human, we're not always perfect, we're going to stuff up from time to time, or we're not going to do things to a level that maybe we were wanting. And having that level of acceptance and compassion towards ourselves to go, hey, I messed up today, but I can do better tomorrow. I can do differently tomorrow. I can make amends by doing this, or I can repair this relationship by, going and having a conversation with someone. So it's recognizing those elements. And I think too of that self-kindness piece, there's so many ways that we can do that. And a really valuable thing is to recognize our self-talk. So is my inner dialogue, and again, this takes no time. This is me doing this during my day, not adding in anything extra. I'm just noticing, which is a really important component of mindfulness as well. Just noticing, how am I talking to myself about myself? Is it compassionate? Am I accepting my common humanity? Would I talk to somebody else in the same way? Or would I never talk to anybody else like this? The thing is too, the way we talk to ourselves has the same impact on our brain as if it was somebody else criticizing us. The way our brain responds to that is the same as if, Hayden, you were saying to me, Jo, your hair looks shit today. Our brain reacts the same way. It reacts the same as if I sat here, when I'm saying the same to myself, and my hair looks shit today. It's the same. Our brain reacts the same way. So we need to embrace that mindfulness, to have that awareness and notice in the moment as we're kind of, talking about, in that inner dialogue. being aware of that, and how can we make some shifts? Is what I'm saying as supportive to myself as I could possibly be? If I was supporting one of my team members, is this the conversation I would be having with them? So
Yeah.
thinking about how can you shift that dialogue, that inner dialogue, to be as supportive of yourself as you are to somebody else.
With that one, Joe, as well, I know there's like often a lot of research around referring to yourself in the third person to help, create a bit more distance between
Yes.
negative emotions that you feel. Does that work in the same way here? And how does that work? Is that the same
Yeah,
thing? Isn't
yeah,
that?
the exact same. And it is kind of like you say, it's kind of creating that separation, and it puts you more in that light of, like you said, you would never say that to somebody else, So if you talk about yourself in the third person, it's like, oh well, I would never say that to somebody else. So yeah, that is really supportive. Yeah, that's a really helpful tip to kind of add into that shift in that dialogue. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. So it's mindfulness, self-kindness, and then common humanity.
Yeah.
Um, what are kind of some examples of where you've seen people do this really well in the day in the life in a service where there's, some stressor, or if you want to paint a picture of like what would it actually look like if someone was to just take their time and do these things. So one is we talked about self-talk. I'd say it's okay. Or
Yeah.
like what would
Yeah.
that look like if you put your educator boots on and we create a fictional stressor?
Yeah. I don't think we have to go too far for that. There's enough real ones we don't have to find. So one thing that I see educators and leaders doing well, who do sit on that side of, they can see their resources, as a whole lot more helpful than their demands, is having capacity to kind of have a short self-compassion break. And this doesn't necessarily mean moving away from the situation. It's part of that recognizing what's going on for you and going, having a bit of a hard time at the moment. And I need to just separate myself from this situation. And the thing is, we can't necessarily do that physically, but emotionally we can do that. And I think, and one phrase that I often use with educators, particularly those working with children with challenging behaviours, is that, this is happening in front of me, not to me. So that's, really compassionate act to say, this is happening in front of me, not to me.
Yeah, what
And
do
the
you
other
mean
thing
by
we
that,
can,
Joe? In front of me, not to me. Can you explain that?
so this situation, so for example, if it might be in a leadership position, it might be an educator coming to you and going, telling you about some conflict that they're having with their team member, that you can go, okay, well, thank you for that information, let's make a time to talk about it or whatever, that I'm not taking all of that on board and I'm not carrying it as my burden. I can support someone to take it off them, but I can go, okay, thank you for that. And I'm just going to pop it over here. I'm not going to carry it around with me. Because if you then have a parent comes in and they do the same, they hand it to you, somebody else comes in and they hand you another one. And then you have, some in the department or somebody else on the phone and they're handing you more. It gets very heavy after a while. Carrying lots of little things gets really heavy after a while. So it's making that conscious effort to go, okay, I don't have to carry this stuff around with me. I can pop that down. Which really kind of ties in with thinking about the different types of empathy as well. So when we're looking at empathy, often we talk about empathy as putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, but which is emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is exhausting. So it's that same concept of taking everyone's stuff and holding on to it, or jumping down into the hole with someone who's stuck in a hole. You jump into the hole and then you kind of go, oh, hang on a minute, now we're both stuck in the hole. So it's thinking about, okay, I can, maybe take a ladder down to the hole and go, how's things going, blah, blah, blah. But I've got the ladder to come back out. So it's thinking about how do I take, so it's more that relational empathy. rather than, and kind of going, I can see you're having a hard time. I can take that stuff off you, but I don't have to carry it with me. So it's having that bit of a separation of, that this is happening here in front of me, not to me. So kind of to support that kind of separation.
That's really interesting. So is that
Yeah.
almost just like a bit of a mental skill set, like that you develop just around, and that visualization really helping, and then the more that you can practice that, and taking these self-compassion breaks to maybe reflect and journal on that, to separate it from yourself, is
Yep.
that kind
Yep.
of how
Absolutely.
you develop it? Yeah.
Yeah. And Brené Brown talks about it as entanglement, which I think is such a fabulous analogy to think about, And when I think about that, I kind of think of, two balls of wool kind of all messed up together. It's really hard to separate yourself out when you get into that. It takes a long time then to, unwind those two balls of wool or whatever else you can picture to be able to separate yourself out again.
Yeah, and do you recommend people to do things like journaling, to like maybe have a physical space to write something down and put it away in a
Yeah.
box, or how? Because I know some people can do mental sort of
Yes.
visualizations, but what other strategies do you help people to cultivate that?
Absolutely. You could literally have a physical box sitting on your table and just open it, close it, like as a visual or a reminder to go, yep, I'm popping it in the box. You might journal. And again, because sometimes too, we don't necessarily have time to get out that pen and paper. So you might do the journaling of an evening and you might have the box sitting on your desk as that visual reminder to go, I'm just popping it into there until I can deal with it. So just thinking about whatever kind of way you're going to be able to stick to, and it might be a combination of those. And also too, in that journaling though, yes, that can be a helpful way to unpack some of what's happening for us. But also too, if we're just journaling about the hard stuff, then sometimes we can get stuck in that as well. In thinking about compassionate journaling, think about also documenting what were the compassionate things that you did for the day for yourself, and what were the compassionate things you did for the day for your team or for your children and families. So that what you're doing in that celebrating and remembering what you did, you're supporting yourself to do more of that. Because when we're looking at compassion as a leadership skill, what we want to do is to create an environment and a team or an organizational space. And I kind of use in my book the term a kaleidoscope of kindness and compassion, because I just love that imagery, is that we want to create a tone of all of our interactions, of all of our engagements, and that this is just a place where kindness and compassion is the norm. So that we're crowding out those opportunities for those, toxic relationships, there's toxic engagement, all those other things, there's all of those job demands, and shining our light on those job demands all of the time. It shifts capacity, or the room, literally, it crowds out all of those other things. So because we're tipping our scale of, resources demands, we're crowding out, the demands, and then that they're weighing less heavily as well. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I love that point on the compassionate journaling, because often even recently I think I've been catching myself just doing like stream of consciousness journaling to kind of get some thoughts out of my head, but then it's often just like that negativity bias, those ants of just like a lot of crap, which is okay. But I think from a lot of what the research shows as well is like, if you write 3 gratitudes every day after 21 days, you actually retrain your brain to start to look for things that are more positive and optimistic, which is probably exactly the same effect here. Is if you're actually purposefully focusing on compassionate journaling and things that you did for yourself, you'll build a muscle that you'll start to scan for those things and in others that you work with, So
Yeah.
you're not often, and I think that's a really good point, because I know, in services, when, you might have some difficult team members, and it becomes a bit gossipy, and you're just sort of
Yes.
focusing on a lot of the negatives,
Yeah.
but we really have to train ourselves to see the positives. And it's not to say that it's not, the negatives aren't bad. Like you said, there's a spectrum, but
Yeah.
you got to train your mind to do that as well. And this kaleidoscope of kindness, I really like that concept. I guess,
Mm.
what advice would you give to people, I know, like, that maybe don't have that team level approach to this, and they feel like they're the only one out there doing this, and it's just they're swamped in an environment that is not kind. Like, what would your advice be to those people on how they can start to shift that balance? Or
I think too often what we do in leadership positions is try to work on the squeaky wheel, the people that are bringing that negativity and, all of those things that aren't helpful in supporting a positive organizational culture. But if we make shifts though, and team up with those people that we know have capacity for this and are on board, again, we're kind of building that, filling that space with people that we know are compassionate and we know have got, those levels of kindness. But also too, we might kind of really, I don't want to say force it, but kind of really practice it on a bit more bigger scale, to go, okay, we're going to have a kindness day once a month or once a week or however. Because like some of that research around gratitude, we know when we concentrate those and we're really specific and thoughtful around it, what we're doing and planned and intentional, then when in that concentrated level, we actually have those bigger benefits. Because when it comes to kindness and compassion, people who are completing a kind act, the people who are receiving the kind act, and people who are witnessing the kind act all have those hormonal changes that we talked about before that really support us to, stabilize our mood and experience more positive emotion. So what we're doing is kind of really intentionally thinking about ways that we can do that. So we might have a gazetted day of the month. You might involve families, all of the children, and talk about, and think about how many ways can we complete kind acts in that day. So really kind of beef it up and being really intentionally in that, to kind of go, this is, I suppose it's changing some of the script of this is who we are, without, and we don't want it to be, forced. We don't want it to be inauthentic. Like you mentioned before, we don't want to err on that toxic positivity. We still want it to be authentic. So thinking about, and there might, your team meeting might be a brainstorm of all the different kind of acts that you can possibly do in that day, so that people have got a bit of a head start.
yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's such a great one. And I think, to your point, again, that taking a strengths-based approach to change, as you mentioned, like, versus working on the squeaky wheel. A lot of people, they're like, oh yeah, this team member is annoying me or whatever. But try and focus on building a positive spiral, because we know it does spiral, with those that you can bounce off, and then that's your person, and just start there versus starting on, okay, how do I change this person? It's better to, because if someone's in meerkat mode, brain mode, and they've got their own maybe issues, they're not going to be able to engage with you rationally to on these topics. So you have to really help use the environment, which is a resource, to lift them up out of that. I love that that strength-based approach you mentioned there. And I think the other thing that's really cool there is, like, having like a kindness day where you can involve the whole service, and then it becomes an element of your program. If you can look at what is the kind acts that the children did to each other, and celebrate those. And if you do have someone that maybe is a bit of a thorn, try giving them some flowers and then being angry at you. Like, it's probably not impossible. And you also will get that benefit as well. Like, if you do a kind act, as you said, you just, in doing it, you also get a benefit. So it's selfish in a way, but it's not. So that's a really cool approach. And have you kind of what do those kindness days look like, or like when you've seen examples of services that have built like a compassion culture, like
Yeah.
what does that look and feel like? Or if you've got any examples you might be able to share.
So they might be, some of them do like little post-it notes on each other's lockers with messages of gratitude. And again, really specific about what that is. Some services have things like their own like community kitchen, or like a clothes exchange, and they kind of, to give those a bit of a revamp, and, lots of people feel that they can contribute to those things on those days in particular. It kind of gives people permission to be able to do those things. Other things might just be, and again, taking out the bins, taking out the rubbish for somebody else who's on late shift. All those, they might be as tiny as that. Or, they can be done sort of on that bigger scale. And some of that too might be even thinking about your local community. Is there a local, charity or somewhere that you can volunteer? And that kindness day might be, everyone volunteering at something outside of the centre as well, and giving back to the community. And we know early childhood educators and leaders do a lot in that space of giving back to their communities already. But sometimes it can be good to have a bit of a fresh look and a different view of that as well, of how that can look in your space.
That's really cool, because I know like some of these, can become quite big initiatives, and I know one thing that's often a challenge for people is they find it might be corny to do something like that, or they're maybe not ready to go into the deep end. There's probably some that are like, this is awesome, I'm going to do a kindness day. But for those, what would you recommend for those that are maybe kind of newer in their journey to this? Like, how do they kind of start to get exposure to this in maybe a more smaller way?
In a smaller way, that concept of, the kindness approach. Some services I've worked with have done it with the children in their rooms, and they have a kindness tree, and they just document kind acts that have happened in the room, and again, that other educators have done for them, or that the centre director or manager has done, and they document some of those things and invite them to come and read that and see what they've put on there. So it doesn't have to be huge things, and we can start, with the children and kind of work our way up, but ideally we're modelling those things first. And I think too, another really small thing that we can do on a daily basis, and one of the most compassionate acts that we can do, is actually listen. Because often we have in our in our communities that we ask someone, how are you? But it's more a greeting. We really are saying hi. We say, hey, how are you? But we don't really listen to the answer. So just something as simple as, asking someone how they are, and wait and listen for the answer, and really show that you are listening. And I think extending that to kind communication as much as we possibly can, so that our verbal and non-verbal communication is synced up, what we're saying and how we're kind of looking engaged with someone kind of marries up, that, we're not saying, how are you? And kind of looking somewhere else at something else. And in that too, there's an approach called active constructive responding, which we've got on a slide because it's a little bit tricky to talk about this. A graphic is so much easier to think about this. So this is when someone is sharing information or news with you. So we can either respond passive constructive, passive destructive, active destructive, or active constructive. So when we are responding passive constructive, so someone has kind of shared some information with you and you kind of go, oh, that's nice. So it feels kind of very inauthentic and quite fake and forced. Passive destructive, though, is we just start talking about something altogether different. So we ignore what they've talked about, and we just start talking about what's important to us. active destructive is kind of telling them that idea or that information, I don't really care about it, or I don't like that idea, that's a dumb idea, what are you thinking? Which then, makes someone feel very dismissed, and less really undermining that psychological safety that we want to, create within our environments, where people feel it's okay to share ideas, it's okay to make mistakes. And that's, we have this level of comfort that goes with that. Ideally, what we want to work towards is active constructive. Oh, tell me more about your idea. So again, we're matching our verbal and non-verbal communication, to say, okay, tell me more. What else were you thinking in that space? Or how did you think that was going to apply? All those, sorts of things that really show our genuine engagement with what they are offering us. So it feels very different. And it's compassionate for us because we're kind of not, taking somebody else down, which never feels nice. And it's compassionate for that other person. But also, too, we are modeling as leaders, this is the kind of engagement that we need to have. So that those small little, drops of modeling is what we're putting into those resources for the whole team as well. We get the benefits, but also to the whole team. We're dropping into their resources bucket by showing them and, using strategies like this. And this might be a strategy that you share with the team to go, okay, next year, one of our aims is to have more kind communication. And this is a way we can do it. Because often we kind of go, oh, let's use more kind communication. But what does that look like and what does it sound like? So this is an example of what it can sound like.
That's really cool. And it's almost like, if you're not feeling comfortable to give yourself compassion, you can start with giving it to others through active listening, which will help build that muscle anyway. If some people aren't getting started in that, which is a really really good point. And thanks for showing that graphic too. There's so many cool ideas on different things that we can do, and I know we've touched a lot on that model of sort of mindfulness, self-kindness, and common humanity. One thing curious to hear as well, on the common humanity side, how do you go about helping people have self-compassion, but also not sort of, I guess, making excuses for poor behavior or mistakes? So how do you know that line is what would you recommend for people to do that correctly, I suppose?
And I think too, there is that the compassion is slightly different to kindness. To empathy. Empathy is kind of that, feeling and acknowledging. Compassion is the doing the act. So it's acting on it. So that action might just be listening. That action might be doing something for someone. But also too, that we have that amount of psychological safety in that we want to make people accountable. It's important that people are accountable, which is a really important component of psychological safety. But in that accountability of this is what you are accountable for, what is one way I can support you or help you in that? So the expectation is that that's what you're going to move to. I understand the reason that this is challenging, and often it's around time. I understand the reason that this is challenging around time, or relationships are often the two biggest ones. So what is one thing that I can do to help you? But also too, that brings to mind for me that we really need to ensure that we are using elements of being an effective giver. So when we look at elements of being an effective giver, we need to look for win-win situations, so as many people benefit from the outcome as possible. Another great component of being an effective giver is asking for help. So where you create an environment where that help seeking is okay. So by you asking for other people for help, then you're giving them permission to ask you for help in return. But a really, really important component of being an effective giver is to have clear boundaries in your giving. So for example, you can hear, one of your rooms, there's a lot of dysregulated children for the day, a lot of children having a really hard time, and the room is kind of getting pretty messy, pretty untidy, kind of looks as ratty as it sounds. So you might go, okay, I actually really don't have time today. but 5 minutes, I could spare 5 minutes. So you go into that room and say, I've got 5 minutes. What is the most effective thing I can do for you in 5 minutes? Or you might say, I've only got 5 minutes. I'm just going to reset the home corner and clear up this space for you. So there's a space that kind of feels a little bit more put back together. So you're really clear in the boundaries, because if you go in and go, oh, you guys sound like you need a hand, half an hour, they're going to need a hand for the rest of the day some days. And it's really hard then to extract yourself, and you're kind of there getting, resentful, kind of going, now I'm not getting my work done, and oh my God, how do I get out of this? And, all those sorts of things. So then we're contributing to our own, emotional exhaustion and stress levels, and putting more demands in our own bucket, rather than kind of, seeing that as something that is supporting. So being really clear in those boundaries. It's not that we're not offering help at all, but we're being really intentional and thoughtful in that help giving, so that we make sure we don't exhaust ourselves as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think from all this, there's a real, I think hopefully the viewers have understood that this is like a capability that you build, and that you there's multiple angles to this toolkit, and so hopefully this gives people a bit of a sense of kind of the lay of the land of some different ideas that you can pick up to start to build your toolkit, but not to get overwhelmed. Jo's obviously done a lot of time in this, and it's probably, we'll call her an expert, but I'm sure there's still so much more in this space that everyone's still learning about. So kind of taking kind of just a couple of ideas and seeing how, and also that's part of it too, is like there isn't one intervention that everyone should do. And I think it's really important that people understand that you look for what we call an intervention as doing something that is in this space that's aligned to maybe an interest that you have, or something in your current habits. So, if you're a big writer and you like journaling, maybe that angle on compassion could be one. If you like kind of organizing activities at your service, you're super extroverted, maybe you could do a kindness day. If you didn't like that and you're more introverted, then maybe just a mindfulness session on compassion could be for you. So I think it's important to know thyself when you're like looking at this. And I was also curious, maybe on that mindfulness angle, Jo, because I know maybe for more of the introverts that are scared to kind of maybe even just have a convo, have you got any like mindfulness self-compassion exercises that you know of you'd recommend, or even that we could do on the call, even if we had 2 minutes? I don't know.
I'm pleased you say that, because I kind of was going, I hadn't mentioned that yet. One of my favorite is a loving kindness meditation, or a metta meditation. And I actually have a copy of an example adapted for early childhood in my book as an appendix, because it's really, really powerful tool, because it extends that compassion to yourself, and it also extends that compassion to others. But if you're looking at, establishing or, expanding your mindfulness practice, accessing, there's lots of great apps out there like Smiling Mind, like Insight Timer, and just do a little search on there for a loving kindness meditation or a metta meditation. And if that's something too, like you said, if you're, would feel a whole lot more comfortable doing a practice for yourself, then that's something that you can do. And you might, if it's not something that you're familiar with, start with a 1-minute practice and expand, to a 5-minute practice, 10-minute practice. Or if you go, I can't sit still, do a walking meditation. You can actually still use the words of a loving kindness meditation when you're doing anything. Often when I'm going for a walk, I will do a loving kindness meditation as I'm walking. Particularly if I've had, a rupture in a relationship, I might, I'll do a loving kindness meditation, and it is projected towards them. It's, the intent of sending well wishes to that other person. And again, this can be something that you might start your staff meetings with, a short mindfulness practice as well. It really supports in building that self-compassion, but also too, there's so many other benefits that's a whole other webinar.
No, that's great. Well, I think unfortunately we may have accidentally disabled the chat minutes, so we might struggle to get questions come through, which is apologies. I'll learn to make sure that's effective for next time. But we've sort of got 5 minutes towards the end, and maybe I was thinking, do you reckon, Jo, we could even do a very short, like, loving kindness meditation together? Like, I'm even happy to
Sure.
I
Yeah.
know one, but you're the person I'd love to see. If you're not comfortable, I'm happy to do it because it's my I'm throwing it on you. This wasn't planned.
Absolutely. I can do a little cheat, and I'll just kind of.
Yeah. Cool. Why don't we do
Yeah.
hopefully everyone on the call, we can do a little intervention. We'll model it. And we do it for 2 minutes, Jo, and then we can kind of close with thanks and from there. Take it away.
Absolutely. Okay. So if you're in a space where you're comfortable to close your eyes, I invite you to close your eyes. If not, you can just look at the screen or just gaze softly down in front of you. And I invite you firstly just to bring attention to your breath. Just noticing your inhalation and your exhalation. And if you choose, you can actually put your hand on your heart as you silently repeat these phrases to yourself that I will say. So firstly, I invite you to direct kindness and compassion towards yourself. Repeating to yourself, may I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. And then next, I invite you to extend kindness and compassion to all those within your service. May you all be safe. May you all be healthy. May you all be happy. May you all be peaceful. And then next, I invite you to extend that kindness and compassion to all. So all within your community, within your family. May I and all beings be safe. May I and all beings be healthy. May I and all beings be happy. And may I and all beings be peaceful. Then I invite you to finish with one deep breath. And then when you're ready, I invite you to very slowly and very gently open your eyes again if you've got them closed.
That was wonderful, Jo. You have a great voice for that. Thank you for taking us through that. And that sort of, I think, is a nice way to round out the session. I think, so many big takeaways from me, and I'm so grateful, Jo, to spend this time with you and be able to pick your brains. I think, learning about kind of that JDR balance model, learning about kind of self-compassion as something we can tap into, learning about the different ways that we can explore that, whether it be through mindfulness, self-kindness, common humanity, things we can do in our service with individuals, through listening, also just for ourselves through mindfulness and choosing those and journaling and choosing those ones that suit us best. I think we want to make sure that everyone in this sector takes care of themselves. I know it's such important work, and you're shaping futures of little people. And so we want to extend a big thank you for all the work that you do every day. And if you really love this session, feel free to write to us and Jo. I think we had a link there to Jo's book, which you can view. I think we'll put that one here. Hang on, there it is. There's a link to that. We'll continue to run these sessions. We will be doing webinars for weekly. We really want to try and elevate the sector. So we have another one which is next week on, which I'll put the little CT up. Sorry, we'll just plug ourselves. Yeah, an ECE market pulse, bit of a different tact, but is around how services are strengthening occupancy and quality in 2026 with Ash Sachdev, the CEO of Care for Kids, and Karen Mills, the head of operations at Amiga Montessori. So that'll be, yeah, a little bit more on the other side of things. But yeah, really keen for your feedback. We're running a few of these, and we just want to make sure, yeah, we're adding value to people, and yeah, the people are loving it. So big thanks again for coming along. You can view the recording as well afterwards. And thanks so much, Jo, for joining us today. We love having
Thanks,
you.
Hayden. Wishing
Awesome.
everyone well.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, cheers. Oh, actually, before we go, everyone, we'll do one last thing, which is a poll on how you went with the session. We'd love to get your feedback. If everyone could just fill that out for us real quick, that would be great. And I'm going to start it. There we go. Awesome. That's great. How many of those meditations, out of curiosity, do you have, Jo, up your sleeve?
I've got a couple.
That's cool. Yeah, I can get some off you off the side. That was a really great yeah, little PPI. So I'm glad we could get some time to do that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for this, and we will yeah, if you can fill out that survey for us, that would be awesome. And we look forward to seeing you at some of the other ones that we'll be running. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. If you can, yeah, drop us those votes. Lots of very satisfied, Jo, so it's awesome.
Great.
Okay, awesome. I might end it there. We've got 9 votes. Maybe give it one more. There's still a couple people filling it out. Can you see that on your screen, Kelly, in the background? Cool. No, is it gone? Okay, hang on. Let's put that up. There we go. Awesome. Thanks, Kel. Beauty. We've got 10 votes. We might leave it up for a little bit. Okay. Beautiful. I think that's kind of stalled there now. We will then close it off. All good, Kel? I'm looking at our support team in the background. Yeah. Okay, cool. Beautiful. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Jo. I'll give you a buzz.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.